Hey all, I'm back to hopefully finish off our reading of Daughters of Fire and Sea. I didn't want you to have to wait too long, and this week is really busy for me, so I wanted to make sure I took time to finish. I also forgot my headphones, my earbuds, so hopefully the sound is going to be all right for this recording, and we won't hear my cats meowing or something. But yeah, let's just get into it. We ended with chapter 29, and everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. The dragons have been summoned, but now they've gone mad and they are attacking people and they've taken off. And Lyric and Runa now cannot be next to each other because these new wyverns that have been summoned as well and are tied to them somehow are attacking each other. So yeah, what is going to happen now? All right, so let's get into it. Okay, chapter 30, Runa. Runa sat on the ground. Her wyvern, Wraith, was sitting beside her and watching the tree line. She demanded to know why they'd attacked Lyric, but the damned creature kept repeating that her twin sister was compromised and dangerous. When pressed, they couldn't tell her why. When Runa insisted Lyric was safe and Wraith had to trust her, the wyvern maintained it had to protect her, even if that meant protecting her from herself. Elladan, pacing in front of her, scrubbed his hand through his hair and gave Runa a worried look out of the corner of his eye. He'd sent Laerdy and Taith to get Egane from the pit, worried the Aenarans had abandoned him when the dragons attacked. Before the dragons had flown east, they'd set fire to a swath of trees leading away from the clearing. From the smoke in the sky, the forest was currently burning northward in the direction of Runa's father and the village. It should have been too wet for the dragon fire to advance, but it burned through the trees like they were nothing more than dried sticks. Though worried for his brother, Elladan had insisted on staying with Runa, presumably to guard her. The Aenarans who'd survived had all fled, perhaps to check on the mother tree, and Runa and the Sireni were the only ones left in the bloodied clearing. "I'm fine," Runa said, though she didn't feel it. She'd been reaching out to Eleonora ever since Sashala dragged Lyric into the trees, but her ancestor hadn't responded. Runa couldn't feel her grating presence at all, as if their connection had been severed. "Did you do something to her?" Runa looked at Wraith. "What?" Elladan asked, pausing. "Not you," Runa said. "To who?" Wraith asked. "Eleonora," Runa said. It was probably better if she stopped speaking aloud when Elladan couldn't hear the other half of the conversation. "I don't know that person," Wraith said. "She was in my mind. She talked to me." "Your mind is safe," Wraith said. "I'm protecting you." Runa frowned. "Are you preventing her from speaking to me? You've severed our connection?" "I've shielded your mind from psychic attacks." The wyvern looked back at the trees. "Sashala," Elladan said. Runa looked up and saw Sashala jogging towards them. She stood up, brushing off her skirt. Wraith leaped off the ground and hovered near her shoulder, watching as the Sireni woman approached. Runa eyed the wyvern warily, but they didn't give any indication that they were about to attack. "Lyric?" Elladan asked as Sashala ran up to them. "Safe," Sashala said. Her dark eyes brushed over Runa's face. Her wyvern only seems to respond to Runa now that the priests are gone. "Laenadara," Runa growled. "She did this." She looked over at Laenadara's body. Elladan told her Fury had nearly bitten the High Priestess in half when she'd yelled at him, waving her dagger and screaming Valanian. Whatever she'd been trying to do hadn't worked, unless she'd wanted to die. Why had Laenadara summoned the wyverns, the guardians, for Runa and Lyric? Had she hoped to keep them apart or get them to kill each other? But why? None of it made any sense. They'd successfully summoned the old ones, and they'd wanted to help. "I don't understand," Elladan said, echoing her thoughts. "The Aenarans aren't killers." "They did threaten to kill you," Runa said. Elladan shook his head. "Why would they destroy themselves? Why would they summon the dragons only to unleash them upon the world?" His face was grim as he looked east. "What will they do, the dragons?" Runa asked. "What any animal feeling attacked would do," Elladan said. "Attack or flee. When they perceive the threat has passed, they'll likely feed or nest, probably both." "And if their rage doesn't falter? If they continue to feel the need to destroy?" "Then the fires in Aenar will be the first of many. Can you imagine what one of them could do to a city? To Corsicania or Fabria? What if they burn the fields, destroy all the crops? Winter will be here soon. Elladan looked at Sishala. We must send word to the Gale. Warn them about the dragons. Sereth was there, Runa said, picturing the blue dragon in her mind. Elladan looked at her. You saw her? He asked, awe in his voice. Runa nodded. She left as soon as she saw the three. She didn't speak to us. Where did she go, do you think? Was she affected like the others? Maybe she's safe because she left. We must get home, Elladan said. If Sishara has awakened... He turned, staring towards the trees, and rubbed a hand over his jaw. Sishala, take Lyric and Kel to the Talon. Hopefully the dragons left her alone. Return home as fast as the winds allow. Tell Hallie she must be swift. I'll wait with Runa until Laerdy and Taith return with Egane. We'll fly with Kaya aboard the Skybird. Perhaps the Gale will know what to do with the wyverns, how to fix the girl's magic. And if the Skybird was destroyed? Sishala asked. We'll figure it out then, Elladan said. He looked at Runa, who nodded slowly. It seems we'll all be safer if Lyric and I stay separated for now, Runa said, until we figure out what's going on and why our guardians think we're dangerous to each other. If the wyverns are part of Lenadara's spell, then perhaps they can be turned off, or... Wraith looked at her, and Runa's loneliness whispered from the back of her mind. She was surprised that she feared the wyvern disappearing. They'd been together less than an hour, and yet the idea of being alone again bothered her. The wyvern landed on her shoulder, their claws tugging at her robe. Runa reached up and stroked her fingers over their spine. Despite being able to see through the wyvern's body, they felt remarkably robust, the scales rough against her skin. Yes, Captain, Sishala said. She gave Elladan an inscrutable look, then jogged back towards the trees. We'll leave as soon as Laerdy and Taith return with Egane, Elladan said. Will we be safe in the airship? Runa looked up into the dark sky. The dragons are out there somewhere. The night should offer some protection, Elladan said, following her gaze. We'll have to risk it. The Skybird will be faster than the Talon, as we can fly across the land. And you think Kaya will take us? It's what she was ordered to do, Elladan said. Maybe she already left when she saw the dragons. No, Elladan said. Wraith's head turned to the side, and Runa followed their gaze. Kaya was striding towards them with several Sareni at her back. Her face was a mask of fury as her eyes fell on Runa. What madness have you unleashed? Kaya roared. Wraith began to glow a dark, menacing red, and they lifted off Runa's shoulder. Careful, Kaya, Elladan called, holding up a hand. Kaya slowed, her eyes snapping to the wyvern. She continued walking towards them, some of the threat leaving her body. Why are the dragons in the sky? Her voice was muted, but no less demanding. Runa stroked Wraith's back, feeling a knot of tension between her own shoulders. No threat, she thought. The Skybird, Elladan asked. Is safe, Kaya said. We're still tethered near the beach. Her eyes took in the devastation, pausing on the bodies of Lenadara and another Ayanaran. You said you were communing with their tree. We summoned the old ones to destroy the taint, Runa said. Kaya frowned at her. The taint, she repeated. It's bound to the shore. Why call the dragons now? Why risk this? She gestured at the bodies. You were ordered to leave it alone. It's spreading, Elladan said, beneath the ground. Soon the shore will not be the only place the taint corrupts. Thousands could die. The Sareni behind Kaya shifted uncertainly, exchanging glances and brushing their hands on their weapons, as though drawing comfort. Kaya stared at Runa, then Elladan, a sharp look in her eyes. Your sister? She asked, looking back at Runa. I've sent her with Sishala to the Talon, Elladan said. They'll travel separately to the Gale. We must inform them that the old ones have returned. Separately? Why? Kaya's keen eyes shifted to Wraith on Runa's shoulder. Wraith reared up on their back feet, nearly unbalancing Runa with the shift in weight. She followed the wyvern's gaze and saw three figures coming from the trees, visible by the bright stars overhead and the glow of fire at their backs. It was Laerdy and Taith, struggling with someone between them. Wraith bristled, flickers of red light gathering atop their snout as the wyvern stared intently at the approaching men. Don't attack, Runa thought desperately, wrapping her hand around the wyvern's side. My father, it's my father. Egane flailed between the two bigger men, grunting and hissing as they dragged him forward. As the men drew closer, Runa saw that Laerdy had long scratches across his chest, and Taith's left eye was bloody. Kaya and her Sareni sailors whirled around, reaching for weapons. What's going on? Kaya demanded. We need to sedate him, Runa said, watching her father's face contort as he bared his teeth and hissed violently. Egane thrashed, arching his back and twisting in a way that made Runa cringe. Wraith hissed, and Egane's wild eyes snapped towards the wyvern and Runa. The unnatural green glow of his eyes intensified, and he inhaled sharply. Runa sagged, feeling as if she'd been punched in the chest. She felt something unspooling out of her, draining her. She blinked, eyes blurring. Wraith roared, and Runa managed to gasp, "No, Wraith!" Then Kaya stepped forward and slammed her fist into Egane's face, snapping his head back. Egane sagged in Laerdy and Tate's arms, head lolling. Gasping, Runa felt the world flood back into focus. The terrible feeling vanished, and she tightened her hand on Wraith. "Stop," she commanded, willing the wyvern to listen. Wraith relaxed and settled back on her shoulder, and Runa breathed out in relief. Why did the wyvern listen now, but not when faced with Lyric? "What is Egane doing here?" Kaya demanded, whirling back to Elodin. "What have they done to him?" Elodin sighed, his eyes troubled. "It's a long story," he said. "We need to get moving. We don't know if the old ones will return, and Seshara is out there somewhere." Kaya blinked, shock registering on her face. "Is she—" "We don't know," Elodin said. "Runa saw her, but she disappeared before the three became beasts." Kaya looked at Runa appraisingly. "You spoke with her?" "No," Runa said. "She left before I could. She didn't seem to want to stay with the three." Kaya nodded. "We should look for Canvar root on the way to the ship," Runa said, looking at Elodin. "I thought I saw some when I was walking in the forest earlier today. It's a sedative." She glanced at Egane, head still sagging against his chest. "We shouldn't let him wake, if possible. He was doing something to me, and to Wraith." "Who?" Elodin asked. Then his eyes flickered to Wraith. "Oh, yes, I'd prefer if Kaya doesn't punch him again." Kaya arched an eyebrow. "You will tell us what to look for?" Elodin asked. "Will we be able to find it in the dark?" "Yes," Runa said. "I can make light if you fashion torches." "We should get in the air before dawn comes," Kaya said. "The darkness is already softening." Runa glanced towards the trees where Seshala had fled with Lyric. They'd never been apart for longer than a day in their entire lives. Worry tightened her stomach, and she stroked her fingers across Wraith's warm scales. Had she gained an uncle and father only to lose her sister and mother? "I need to send a message to Rathgar's hold," Runa said. Kaya hissed and crossed her arms. "Let them burn." "To warn my mother," Runa glared at her, "to find out if she survived." "Seshala may already be sending a goal at Lyric's request," Elodin said. "But," he eyed Kaya, "you have a Skyrunner, don't you? The Gale wouldn't have sent you without one." "I'm not wasting one on the butcher," Kaya spat. "Seshala will have already alerted the Gale about the dragons," Elodin said. "And with the Skybird's speed, we'll reach the sea before they do." "Please, Kaya," Runa said, the plea bitter on her tongue. Kaya growled and turned away, looking north. "Let's get back to the ship," she said, her voice tense. "Then we'll talk about your message." Chapter 31. Lyric. 4 days later. Lyric ducked under Seshala's fist and swung around behind her, her arm catching the taller woman's waist. Face dark with concentration, she stopped Seshala's heel with her foot and twisted around, using momentum to pull her down to the deck of the ship. "Good," Seshala said, slapping the deck with one hand. Her smile was wolfish, the ring through her lip glinting in the morning light. Lyric nodded and released her hold on the woman's shirt. "Thank you, Seshala." "You're getting better." Seshala clapped her on the shoulder. "It's good you are training." "Hallie tells me magic is sometimes too slow when you need to react instantly." Seshala nodded. "A wind caller can die from an unseen knife to the ribs. Enough for today, I think. We'll meet again tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Lyric agreed. She trained with Seshala for over an hour, and though Lyric was sweat-soaked and bruised, her companion was still just as relaxed and unwinded as she'd been at the start. They parted ways, and Lyric walked to the railing, placing her hands on the smooth wood. She lifted her face to the sky and took a deep, cleansing breath, allowing the wind to rush over her and tousle her sweat-dampened hair. Azora flickered into existence beside her, their leafy, seaweed-like wings drifting in the air. They landed on her shoulder and steadied her with one gold eye. "You're scared." The image of a fish darting away from a shadow filled Lyric's mind. "Yes," Lyric said. It'd only been 4 days since they left Ionar and her sister behind, and Lyric kept turning around, expecting to find Runa nearby. "She's safe," Lyric reminded herself. "She's with Elodin. She's following us to the Sareni fleet." It was odd not having Runa close. Their separation was the longest and farthest they'd ever been apart. What if they couldn't find each other again? What if the dragons prevented Runa from coming east, or if they couldn't figure out what was wrong with the wyverns? What was Azora anyway? Lyric knew with certainty that she was connected to the wyvern. Azora was part of her magic somehow. They protected her, acting as a shield against attack or attacking if they thought Lyric was in danger. When she'd first started sparring with Sashala, she'd had to stop the wyvern from interfering. Azora hadn't attacked anyone since Runa, though they watched everything intensely. The wyvern seemed intelligent and capable of free thought, but they also followed Lyric's wishes the majority of the time, like they were more an extension of her arm than a companion. Still, they had a sense of self that a beast didn't possess. Lyric wished she could ask Kandara what she knew about the Guardian, but Azora had severed the connection, and Lyric didn't know how to contact her ancestor herself. She couldn't exactly go to the Vale again. She'd asked Hallie if she knew what Azora was, but the older woman didn't know. "It's part of you," she'd said, steadying the wyvern. "It feels like your magic, your summoning, though it feels more conscious than an actual shield or sword. Maybe it's a tool to give you space and time to cast spells." "I am sorry about your sister," Azora said. A feeling of regret trickled through their bond. "You're sorry?" Lyric looked at the wyvern with surprise. "I feel your sadness," Azora said. "Can you feel sad?" The wyvern blinked, sheer lids sliding down over their striking gold eyes. "I feel your emotions." "But not your own?" "I don't understand." Lyric sighed and looked back at the water. The day was gray and the wind cold, which felt fitting considering her mood. "Never mind," she said. "I just want to understand what happened." Had Laenadara intended to separate Lyric from her sister, or did something go wrong with the ritual? Perhaps the High Priestess hadn't understood the true meaning of the Valanian words she'd spoken. "What do we do now?" Lyric said aloud. "What do you wish to do?" Azora asked. Lyric dug her fingers into the railing. "Fix this. Fix everything. The Old Ones said they could help. They could cleanse the taint. Now, it seems, we have to help them first." Azora landed on the railing beside her hand and watched as a silver fish jumped out of the water and splashed back beneath the dark waves. "But how do we do that?" Lyric asked. "I don't know," Azora said. Lyric rubbed her eyes, feeling another helpless sigh hiss from her lungs. Maybe her mother would know what to do, or maybe there was something in one of her grandfather's books in Hrothgar's hold. Now that Elena was there, perhaps she could help. Lyric frowned. Had her mother ever searched Rakarn's library for information about the taint? Surely she would have. Was that why she was so certain he'd been involved? Or had she ignored it like the Sereni, even though Eladin was convinced it was spreading? It doesn't matter now, Lyric thought. We know how to heal it. Once the Talon was underway, sailing east back to the Sea of Screams, Lyric had asked T'Challa to send a gull to Herlin in Hrothgar's hold. She'd warned him about the dragons and asked him to respond with information about her mother. She'd also asked if he could get a message to Elena and a reply in return. "She has to be alive," Lyric said. "She has to." "Your sister?" Azora asked. "No, my mother." "She is unwell?" "Yes." "I am sorry." Lyric smiled, tears filling her eyes. She blinked them away and reached out to Azora, running her fingers down the wyvern's silky scales. The wyvern arched into her hand like a cat and made a strange rumbling purr. "Let's find Kel," Lyric said. She turned away from the railing and walked across the deck to the captain's cabin, opening the door. Azora glided after her, slipping ahead as Lyric stepped inside. Kel stood by the mirror with his shirt off, twisting to see his back. There was a long, angry burn from his shoulder to his left side, cutting through the intricate tangle of tattoos. His skin was charred, a mix of black and red and waxy white. "Kel!" Lyric gasped, rushing towards him. Azora, startled by her movement, hopped out of Lyric's way and settled on the back of a chair, eyeing Kel with large, radiant eyes. Kel's eyes snapped towards Lyric in the mirror, and he tried to turn around, but Lyric stopped him, resting her hands lightly on his hip below the damaged skin. "I'm sorry," Kel said. "I wanted to see it for myself, and I remembered there was a mirror in here, and—" "I didn't know you were injured," Lyric breathed. She steadied the wound, noting that someone had cleaned and covered the charred skin with ointment. The burn obliterated whole sections of Kel's tattoos, the looping black and green lines severed where the skin had melted and reshaped. "When did this happen?" Lyric stepped back, letting him turn to face her. "When I went to the village with Bresa to check for survivors," Kel said. "A burning branch hit my back." "A branch?" "It was dragonfire. Bresa had to kick me into the water to put it out." His lips curved as Lyric stared at him with frustration, anger, and fear. "It's fine, Lai." "Fine?" Lyric said, her voice rising. "This is a serious injury. If it gets infected—" I'm fine. Kel reached for her and rested his hands on her shoulders. I won't die, Lai. She grabbed his wrists, staring at him with wide eyes. She could sense Azora shifting uncertainly, sensing her panic. Patho helped me, Kel said. He thinks it will heal if I'm careful. Nothing to do about the scar. Patho? Lyric asked, blinking. How did I not notice you were wounded? When you came back to the ship, you were preoccupied. Patho is the Talon's healer. He patched Braisa and me up. Braisa burned his hands. Kel smiled. I'm fine, Lai. Stop saying that, Lyric said. She looked at Kel's face, assessing his health. He looked tired, more so than usual, and sweat beaded on his forehead and dampened the hair at his temples. His skin felt cold and clammy beneath her hands. You're feverish. You may already have an infection. I need my bag. It's not the burn, Kel said. Of course it's... No. Kel looked away from her, his eyes finding Azora. Well, maybe a little, but the tattoos... The spells are damaged. Lyric frowned, remembering their conversation along the road to Rathgar's Hold. I feel different, Kel said, looking down into her face. There are memories, old ones, older than Thenda, pressing against the edges of my mind. It feels like something is thinning. I remember a woman. A woman? Lyric swallowed, feeling a stab of jealousy. Kel smiled and pulled her closer. Lyric released his arms and placed her hands against his chest. His skin was too cold. I know her somehow, like she's family or someone who cared for me, Kel said. But there's this strange feeling in my chest, a tangled knot of something that I think if I could just unravel it, I could... His voice trailed off and he sighed in frustration. It feels powerful, Lai. Kel steadied her face, searching for a way to explain. What does your power feel like when you touch magic? Lyric considered and looked at Azora, who was watching her. It's different now with Azora, but before, when I started speaking a spell and held the runes on my tongue, I'd feel the expansion of something inside me, like I stepped into a stream of light or water. When I summoned wind, I'd feel pressure build around me, and when I released it, it'd rush away and I'd feel this sense of... Lyric blushed and looked down at her feet. It feels good, she finished lamely. Powerful. Kel nodded, a muscle shifting in his cheek. I suppose that's how it feels, building pressure. The knot is alive somehow, like it wants something. It's almost like weight and emptiness existing together. I don't know. You're worried. Lyric thought about the nubs on his back. You think you're going to do something, release something. Yes, Kel said. No, Lyric shook her head. She stepped closer, staring up at Kel with a fierce expression. I told you before, you're not evil. You decide what you are. If something happens, we'll figure it out. Don't try to protect me. I want to help you. I don't want to add to your burdens. Kel stroked his hands down her arms. With the dragons, your mother, and Runa. Lyric felt a pang at her sister's name, and she folded her arms against Kel's chest, leaning into him. She could feel his breastbone sharp against her head. He should have felt warm, not cold. Worry thrummed through her as she thought about the damage to his back. What if she lost him too? What would she do then? I'm sure you won't be separated for long, Kel murmured against her hair. I hope you're right, Lyric whispered. She raised her face, her eyes searching his. Eyes darkening, Kel leaned down and kissed her. His lips were dry, and Lyric pushed against him. He felt strong and stable, and she felt a desperate need to claim as much time as she could with him. When Kel pulled away, leaving Lyric breathless and worried, she rested her head against him again and closed her eyes. What if the Sireni weren't willing to set aside the war and help figure out a way to calm the dragons, and reverse whatever Lenadara and her priests did to them? What if the Gale decided to let Aerith and Rendishar burn? What if Ionar was the last time she saw Runa? And where was Runa now? Was she safe? Was she on Kaya's airship flying to the Sea of Screams? Would Runa be there with Eladin and their father when Lyric and Kel arrived? We'll survive this, Kel said. Lyric breathed in, drawing the scent of him into her lungs, shoving her fears aside. She focused on his heartbeat, thudding rhythmically inside his chest. To the end, Lyric thought, praying her sister could hear her. Chapter 32. Elena. Elena stared at her father with a tightly controlled expression. It was an effort to keep the distrust off her face, but she must have managed it, for he simply studied her, his brown eyes sharp with thought. She was propped up in her old bed, with thick pillows at her back, and she'd folded her hands together in her lap to keep from picking at the coverlet. Elena felt weak and slow, and a glance in a mirror beside the bed had shown her how bloodless her skin looked against the deep red of her robe. Tricticus healed you, King Rakarn said bluntly. His hair was still cut in the same short style from her childhood, but there was silver now that hadn't been present before. He looked older, harsher, if that were even possible, as though the harsh winds from the Sea of Screams had chiseled away all the flesh of his face, leaving just the wide bones beneath. "Yes," Elena said. Her voice was raspy, and it grated unpleasantly when she spoke. Though the Dragon Blessed had performed a miracle repairing the damage to her throat, her vocal cords were permanently scarred. She would never sing again, or delight the scorched court with her voice. Her father's eyes contracted at the tortured sounds, but he said nothing. Rakarn sat stiffly in the chair beside the bed, his focus unwavering on Elena. He didn't shift or fidget, just sat like an immovable statue, his hands resting palms down on his knees. "Your daughters were here in the city," he said, watching her. Elena felt her heart skip, but kept her face blank, controlled. She held his stare without speaking. "I know you have children." Rakarn's eyes narrowed, a crack in his calm appearance. "Curious they dumped you in Avern. Your own children don't care if you die?" Avern? That's where he'd found her? That meant Lyric and Runa had survived. Her girls were alive. She bit her tongue to keep her face calm. "I don't know why you'd try to hide them from me," her father continued. "I could have protected them. Obviously, you failed at that yourself." He was trying to provoke her, she knew it, but Elena felt her blood rise and her face flush. She took a small, controlled breath. "I did not want them to become part of this." "Part of the greatest empire in the world? The strongest bloodline?" "Part of your war," Elena said. Rakarn narrowed his eyes, and the barest hint of a flush darkened his cheekbones. "My war? Everything I do is for Rendishar, for protecting our people, for providing for them." Elena sneered. "Hundreds of Rendisharans are dead because of you, women and children. For every blow you give the Sireni, they respond in kind, sinking ships and bleeding the towns along the sea's edge. And thousands more are alive because I made difficult choices to ensure our survival," Rakarn said. "I know what you've done," Elena spat, venom dripping from her voice. Her hands twisted the coverlet on her lap, trying to rip apart the heavy fabric. "The taint is your fault. Thenda is gone because of you, because of your hunger for power." Rakarn's jaw clenched, and his fingers tightened on his knees, his knuckles whitening from the pressure. "The Sireni killed my mother, my father," he said coldly. "You killed a young woman, someone's daughter." "I prevented a massacre. The Sireni were posed to attack as soon as negotiations began." "There was no sign of that." "Because I killed their assassins on my way to the treaty signing." Rakarn's eyes blazed, his lips drawing back in a sneer. He took a breath and relaxed again, stilling his fingers atop his knees, leaving creases behind in the dark fabric of his pants. "The Sireni have always wanted to destroy us, to drown us in their damned sea. Without me, you wouldn't be alive. Your children would never have been born. Without you, my brothers would still be alive. Better you had died and Mother lived," Elena spat. Rakarn laughed, a harsh, brutal sound. "I will not apologize for my actions, Elena. I do not need your absolution." He stood, staring down at her with a look of disgust, as though he found her weak and useless. "Next time you see your precious again, if he's not already dead, ask him how it was he found you. Ask him why he was so far from his beloved sea." Elena stared at her father, her blood thundering in her ears. She gripped the coverlet, focusing on the feel of the fabric beneath her skin, the pain in her fingers as she twisted sharply, holding on. Smiling cruelly, Rakarn turned and left the room. Elena sat, her body rigid, teeth clenched. She waited, imagining her father striding down the hall and rounding the corner, heading towards his study. She waited for another breath, and then another, and then she broke. Covering her face with her hands, Elena sucked a ragged breath through her lungs and felt tears spring into her eyes. It felt like her heart was breaking, trying to rip out through her breastbone. Was it true? Had her father arranged Egaine's arrival in Alaise Hollow? Had their moments together meant nothing? Despite Rakarn's hatred and disgust for the Sireni, had he conspired to have his daughter fall in love with one? Had he known then what Egaine was, his power? Elena tried to focus on her father's words, tried to shove aside the violation she felt, the heartbreak. Egaine had wanted to tell her something after they first made love in the field by her house. He tried to... No, she couldn't think about that now. She couldn't imagine, wouldn't believe her father willingly let Sireni blood into the Rendisharan line. But if he had, If he'd orchestrated all of this somehow, what plans did he have for Lyric and Runa? Elena could not let her father get his hands on them, not ever. They could never come here. They must not come here. Her hands dropped into her lap, and she stared sightlessly at the far wall. He'd said they'd been here, in the city. Been, but were no longer. What had happened? Where had they gone? Elena reached for a bell on the table beside her bed, nearly knocking over a glass of water. Her hands were shaking, and she took a stilling breath as she rang the bell. A maidservant entered, adjusting her hair with a distracted expression. She was a thin woman with a narrow face and fawn skin covered in freckles. Elena had not known her long, but she quickly learned the woman loved to read. Given her disheveled appearance, Leda had probably been tucked into a chair in the sitting room reading while Rakarn sat with Elena. "Leda," Elena said, tucking away her anxiety and pasting a warm smile on her face. Leda's expression shifted to concern, and she stepped up beside the bed, looking Elena over. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" she asked. "Are you in pain? Should I send for the Dragon Blessed again?" "I'm fine. Thank you, Leda. I was hoping you could tell me about any attacks that happened recently. Or anything unusual?" Leda's forehead wrinkled, and she rested her hands on her hips with a thoughtful expression. "Attacks, Your Highness? Well, we did have a group of Sireni get through the second gate a few weeks ago. They slaughtered several guard squads, and the city was on edge for days afterward. That's the farthest they've ever made it into the city. To think, they could have ended up here in the castle. King Rakarn raged for hours after and sent an entire cadre of soldiers to the dock. I've never seen him so." "They attacked the hold?" Elena interrupted. Leda blinked, refocusing on Elena's face. "Yes, Your Highness. They got their hands on rites of passage and somehow made it through the second gate. Darren, he works in the stables, said that they killed all the guards there, but when the stone guardians were activated, they ran off." She cocked her head to the side, speculation sparking in her eyes. "Odd, isn't it? Don't the guardians only activate if royal blood is spilled? At least that's the legend. I don't remember a time when it's happened before. Can you believe it? In our lifetime. There must be another Rendashara out there, another heir to the—" Leda cut off, paling, her eyes flying back to Elena's face. She twisted her hands in the folds of her apron. "Forgive me, Your Highness," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to suggest that there is— I don't mean to say that— Forgive me. I ramble on sometimes. Can I get you anything?" "Thank you, Leda," Elena said, trying to keep her voice even and calm. "I agree. It is strange. So my father has increased the guards at the dock?" "Yes, Your Highness." Leda's head bobbed nervously. "There's been an increase in patrols all over the city. I doubt very much the Sireni will manage to get inside again." Elena inclined her head. "Thank you, Leda. Let me know if you hear any other news about the Sireni or anything strange in the city. That's all for now." "Of course, Your Highness," Leda said. "It is good to have you back with us." She blinked as if startled she'd said that aloud, then curtsied quickly and left the room. As the door shut quietly behind the maid, Elena leaned back into the pillows and tried to ease the knots in her muscles. She was weak from her illness, and sometimes it was hard to breathe. Elena drew a long, exacting breath into her sluggish lungs and looked down at her hands. The Sireni had her daughters, and likely now knew who they were. Lyric and Runa had been taken weeks ago. Where were they now, and what would the Gale do with her children? Had Elodin learned of their abduction? Had he already rescued them? Where would he take them if he had? Elena closed her eyes and tried to calm herself. Giving in to worry and fear would not help her daughters. If they were with the Sireni, it was unlikely they'd hurt them, at least not right away. First, they'd try to use them. For now, Lyric and Runa were safer there than here with her father. Elodin would see that they were safe. She knew he would. After everything Elena had done for the Sei Khan, he owed her. Still, she had to find a way to contact him, find out where her girls were, make sure they were protected. She would not give up now, even trapped in bed as she was. And perhaps again— Elena swallowed, feeling battered. She hadn't seen Again for 9 years. She had no idea where he was or what he was doing. What did a godchild do when not seducing women? Her lips twisted bitterly. Had his words to her been a lie? Maybe if she'd told him about the girls, perhaps if he'd known— No, she would not think about him. They'd been so young when they'd met, so hopeful, so naive. However they'd found each other, what they'd felt, what they'd shared, it had been real. No one would take that away from her. Who then had betrayed her? Who told the Sireni where to find Elena's daughters? Only a handful of people had known, and all members of Elodin's crew. She knew them, had fought and slept beside them. They would not have sacrificed her children. She pictured their faces, but she couldn't name anyone as a traitor. Elena ground her teeth. Whoever it was that had put her daughters in danger would be punished. She would find them. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, and she sighed, closing her eyes. She had to get out of bed and find out what her father was up to, and she had to find her daughters. The door opened, and Elena blinked her eyes open, feeling groggy. It was Leda, carrying a tray of food. She looked excited. "Good, you got some rest," Leda said, smiling at her. Elena frowned. Her eyes felt gritty and her mouth dry. She just closed her eyes, hadn't she? She turned her head to look towards the window. The light seemed softer, filtered by the thick glass. How much time had passed? "What time is it?" Elena rasped. She reached for a glass of water by the bed. "You slept an entire day, Your Highness," Leda said. "A day?" "Yes, Your Highness." Leda set the tray down on the bedside table, moving aside the water-filled jug and uncovering a bowl of orange broth and slices of dark spice bread. "There have been reports of dragons, Your Highness." Leda flushed, laughing nervously. "I know it sounds ridiculous. No one has seen a dragon in thousands of years, but a merchant coming from Elysian sent a skyrunner to Lord Yendar, claiming he'd seen one west of Lysos. The poor bird arrived half dead from exhaustion with a singed wing. Can you imagine? The merchant claimed Ionar is on fire, and a white dragon attacked one of Elysian's border cities." "Dragons?" Elena asked. Her thoughts felt slow, like they were caught in heavy mud. Surely she'd misheard Leda. "I'd say he was in his cups, of course," Leda continued, "but there have been other reports as well. I don't understand it. I thought the old ones were dead." Leda paused and stepped back from the table. "Begging your pardon, Your Highness." "No, it's all right, Leda," Elena said. "It does seem impossible." What did it mean? Who had brought them back? "My father, how has he taken the news?" "King Rakarn has called a council with his strategists, Your Highness. They are in the war room. He's set to address the city, I believe. The townsfolk are clamoring for a response. People are both excited and concerned. No mobs in the street yet, but there are no dragons here. Not yet." Leda laughed nervously. "I thought the old ones were wise and helpful. Didn't they mediate concerns between the kingdoms after the demon war? Why are they destroying cities?" Dread twisted Elena's stomach, and she pressed her hand over her belly. "I don't know," Elena said. "Thank you, Leda. Please let me know if you hear anything more." Leda nodded, then put a hand in her pocket, laughing. "Forgive me, Your Highness. I almost forgot that I have a letter for you." "A letter?" Elena frowned. "Yes, it was delivered by a stable boy." Leda flushed, staring at the folded paper in her hand. "Were you not expecting one? I thought you might have a male friend or—" Her face turned bright red, and she looked up at Elena worriedly. Yes, I'm expecting it," Elena said quickly, holding out her hand. "Thank you. This is something I'd like kept private." "Of course, Your Highness." Leda gave her the letter, then left the room, closing the door. Elena held the paper in her hands, examining it curiously. The paper was rough, not the silky parchment the highborn used, but one available to anyone in the market. It bore no seal and had been skillfully folded, the ends tucked in such a way that the letters stayed closed. Opening it with her fingernail, Elena unfolded the paper. "They are safe," it read. It was not signed, the words centered in the paper. Who had sent this? She didn't recognize the handwriting, but to who else could it refer other than Lyric and Runa? Eladin must have sent the letter, which meant someone was in the city who could tell her what had happened to her daughters. Smiling with relief, Elena tucked the letter inside her robe. She'd have to burn it. She could not let her father know she had an ally nearby. Looking out the window, Elena's thoughts returned to the dragons. She stared hard at the glass, as if she could see through it to the lands west of Rendishar. Was her father involved? If anyone could summon the dragons, it'd be him. Is this what he tried to do all those years ago? Had he finally succeeded? But if he'd brought the old ones to life, why were they on the other side of Aerith and Ionar? Why weren't they here? Elena thought about Kel's mother, the daughter of Valen she'd seen speaking with her father all those years ago. Could she be connected to Thenda or the dragons? What secrets might she have shared with Rakarn? What mysteries about death and the veil? Why was she helping him? And why hadn't she tried to find Kel? "I need to get out of this cursed bed," Elena growled. She reached for her tray and lifted it with shaking hands onto her lap. She needed strength and clarity. She needed to find out what in hell's name was going on. Lyric and Runa were out there somewhere. They needed her. She would not leave them to fight on their own. She'd find Eladin's man in the city and learn where the girls were. She'd let them know she was alive and tell them to stay away from Rendishar. She'd find out her father's connection to the dragons and his plans for the Sereni, for her daughters, and for Aerith itself. Her father's lust for conquest had never been confined to the sea. Everything that now threatened her children was because of Rakarn's obsession with power, with control. I will find you, she said, thinking about Kel's mother, and you'll tell me how to break my father. Eyes blazing fiercely in her gaunt face, Elena ripped apart a piece of bread and imagined the look on Rakarn's face when she tore his kingdom down around him. And that is the end of Daughters of Fire and Sea. So I really hope that you have enjoyed the adventure in book 1. Book 2 is available and out if you want to keep reading it. And we get a very fun quest in that one and more about the dragons and everything. I really love it. And I was hoping that I would be able to read that one aloud as well for you, but I'm not going to have time with starting game design school like I mentioned some videos ago. So yeah, unfortunately I cannot. But if you want to keep reading the story, the second book is available. And I have been working on the third book, and things have been conspiring against me, so I haven't been able to finish it yet. It's quite thick, just wrapping everything up, and very exciting. But as I've mentioned before, I'm not certain when I'm going to be able to release it, especially given starting school. So, but it is on my list because I do want to finish the trilogy for you so you get the full story and find out what happens with Lyric and Runa and the dragons and everything. So thank you so much for listening and being here with me as we did a reread of book 1. It is my first published book, so a bit rougher than some of my newer stuff, but I still just love the world and the sisters so much, as you will come to find if you read my other books or you've read my other books. I really love Sunshine Grumpy dynamic, so there's always characters like that. But anyway, yeah, thanks for listening. Hopefully the sound was okay since I didn't have my earphones, and the light is okay because it's kind of dark in here. I hope that you are having a great August as much as you can. And yeah, and again, I'm just grateful to have you here, and thank you so much. And I will see you again sometime. All right, thanks. Bye.